What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. Glad to have you back. I am your host, Ronnie Moore of Bassmaster Live, and my co-host, as always, my man, Kyle Jessie, the digital content editor for Bassmaster.com. Kyle, how you doing, man?
I am good. Just got back from Norfolk Lake in North Arkansas for the Strike King Bassmaster College Series event there, and the high school event as well, and ready to get into some kayak content. We were pubbing that a little bit the last podcast, and we're going to jump into it full steam here.
Yeah, we did tease it a little bit that this next podcast that you're listening to would be a special one, and it's a little bit of a kayak flair, actually a lot of bit of a kayak flair, as that is kind of one of the hottest trends in bass fishing. You know, we think about all the different changes that happen in the sport, from technology to tournament venues to brand new names in the sport. There's so many different things, the youth involvement that has happened, the wave there. There's a lot of different aspects to bass fishing that has changed over the years, but one aspect over the last 5 years that has really taken strong hold of a lot of anglers, especially those that are trying to get into the sport without breaking a budget, is the kayak bass fishing. And so for our Yamaha Rightwaters Bassmaster Kayak Series, it is kind of a intense race. There's a lot of people competing in every kayak event, and we're going to break down the nuts and bolts of how they differ from regular Bassmaster events. We're going to have some special guests on today as well that are the experts in that aspect of kayak fishing. But yeah, Kyle, from guys traveling the country with back in the day, it used to think, man, what stream or what creek are these guys taking their kayak to? When I'd see it on the top of their truck or in the bed of their truck. But now these guys are taking their kayak rigs that are outfitted specialty for bass fishing, and they're taking them to big bodies of water, from Lake Fork to Harris Chain, Grand Lake, the classic venues. There's so many different places. And so kayak fishing is getting really big, and I'm interested to learn more about it. I've always been of the mindset that I'm a little bit uneasy in something that's not 21 and a half feet long. I mean, I feel like, when I just set the hook real quick, you know what I'm saying, I'm going to flip that thing over, but that's not the case. That might be old technology from 10, 20 years ago, but not the rigs these guys compete in now.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And, I've had the opportunity to cover a few kayak tournaments, and, something that, honestly, I wasn't super familiar with from a real technical standpoint. I knew, like you had mentioned earlier, how big it was getting and how serious guys are about it. But just to give you an idea, on Bassmaster.com, we have some kayak tours and things of that nature. Like you said, the technology that goes into these kayaks to making them sturdy, give you all the storage you could need, rod holders, everything else, electronics. I mean, that's a really big part of it. You don't naturally think electronics when you think of kayak fishing, but that's a huge part of it. And, to add on to what you said, it's incredible, the lakes and the bodies of waters that these kayak anglers explore with those kayaks. I mean, I remember writing a story last year on a kayak angler that lives in the north part of, I want to say the north part of New York, close to, Waddington and some of those places. And some of the places that he takes his kayak on are, not always the best even for a bass boat. So, I mean, it was really, really mind-boggling and eye-opening, I guess you'd say, just to kind of learn more about this. And, obviously, like we'd said, I mean, we're all, catching on, because it is becoming such a popular trend as kayak fishing.
Yeah, I always think about when we take it to places that would be hard to manage. Maybe the St. Lawrence River, drifting for some boulder fish, out there, like we see the Elite Series guys do. They can kind of control drift with their trolling motor, but they still can't stay in the same spot with the trolling motor. Some of these guys do have pedal drives. Some of them do have trolling motors. Some of them have power pole anchors. They've got a spike, the one thing that goes into the back of the kayak to hold them in place. I mean, the technology is there. We've seen anglers like Carl Jocumsen, Mike Iaconelli really get into the kayak game as well. Also, Keith Combs has been in some in South Texas for sure. But then Mike Iaconelli, I think about it, he's got about 1 billion rods on his front deck, always on the Elite Series. He likes that space to run around. I just want to be near him when he's in a kayak and he catches a big one, because he's probably got rods lined vertically around him in a cocoon, and the antics that happens. He can't break dance on a kayak yet, at least, but it's very interesting. And so it's not just tournaments around the country that we're hosting just for fun, and they're opens and people can just join in. It is serious competition. And just like the Bassmaster Elite Series, where they fish all year long for tournament points and tournament standings, these kayak anglers in the Yamaha Rightwaters Bassmaster Kayak Series, brought to you by TourneyX, these anglers are competing in the Old Town Bassmaster Kayak Angler of the Year. And that's a really tough competition. For the season, we have 5 events, but one of those is the Classic. That is the culminating event. So 4 regular season events that make up the points race. We have 3 in the books. So the guys we're talking to today, the Hammers in the Kayak Series, they got one more tournament to get it done to win that Old Town Bassmaster Kayak Angler of the Year award. And that's really saying something. I've looked at the names of some of these guys on the list, and you know how it is, Kyle. We get added on Facebook by a lot. Every single friend request I have that's pending is someone with a fish holding it up. That's just our sport. We got so many people who love bass fishing. And I know a lot of the names on this list just from Facebook, from Instagram, from Bassmaster, the Classic events when we have those, because that's always seemed like the one time a year that I would notice kayak anglers. But now with our whole tournament series that we do, I'm really paying attention to a lot of these anglers and seeing the same names pop up a time and time again. So it's not just luck of the draw, and it's not just you can pop up and win an event. You have to be skilled, just like on the Elite Series.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing that I've taken away from being able to cover a few of these tournaments on the water, is just the fact that these guys are extremely, extremely talented. And the majority of these guys are, to the same or equal, talent level that you'd see in some of the Opens, Nation, and even Elite Series events. But these guys are choosing to fish from a kayak. It's an avenue that a lot of people are going down. And like you said, even some of the pros, like you said, Mike Iaconelli winning last year at the Chesapeake Bay. I mean, it is really, truly taking on, kind of a world of its own. And, like I said, I've been so impressed covering some of these guys on the water. Like you said, I'll look at this list and I know that I've covered a handful of these guys on the water, and it is really, really impressive, the talent and the skill level. And then, it provides, or I guess presents, a whole new set of challenges, because I mean, it's completely different from fishing in a bass boat. A lot of advantages and then some disadvantages. So it's interesting to see, and it's something I've really enjoyed getting to learn and see firsthand a lot in the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's something that's really interesting to me, and I'll have to get more involved with it and compete and kind of learn. That we have a great lake in Arkansas right here by Little Rock, and that's Lake Maumelle. It's a place that's not too big, not too small, controlled environment. Normally weather doesn't make that place get any crazy. And so that'll be my first place that I dump it in and try it. Or like a place like Lake Norrell, that's down the street from the house as well. It's very small, but it's a place that you can go and kind of get your bearings. But some of these guys, like you said, they do go to the Lake Eufaula's of the world. They go to the Harris Chains of the world. I mean, some of our winners have been floating beside gators bigger than their kayaks. I mean, that has got to be an intimidating thing. And we're going to break down, and we're going to have 4 different guests today, hopefully. And all of these guests were strategically picked out for their success in the Bassmaster Kayak Series. And so I'm very excited to have them on. And when we look at that, I'm just going to go ahead and read some of the Old Town Bassmaster Kayak Angler of the Year race. We've got a pretty tight race with one event left. The last event, I believe, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, it is at Smith Lake in May. So we've got one more event to get it done. A spotted bass lake that has largemouth for sure, big ones as well. And the way that they do tournaments, let's break that down before I get into the top 5, competitors in the Angler of the Year race. The way they do their catches is different than other Bassmaster tournaments, because we do a 5-fish limit and we do it based on weight. Well, when you have hundreds of kayaks out on a lake that you can't necessarily take them back to the scales, they don't have a portable live well on there. There's other ways to do that if you wanted to, but the TourneyX folks have really created a great system with, you take a picture of the fish on the ruler, making sure that everything's visible, that the mouth is touching, the tail is uncovered, and your hand is kind of in the center of their belly, making sure they don't flop around and they stay still. You don't want to Jim Bitter and lose one out there in your kayak, but you go by inches. And so I believe, if I'm correct, it's still 5-fish limit, but it's based on inches. So when you see someone say, yeah, I caught 135 inches today, I mean, goodness gracious, that's a lot of inches for fish. But most of these limits will be, in that 80 range, 80 to 100 range. You catch 5 20-inch fish, which a 20-inch fish could be a 4 to 6 pounder. You catch 5 of those, that's a great limit. And for inches wise, I mean, you can lose out on a kayak championship or an event by 0.25 inches. I mean, I know Eric Siddiqi won the classic and it was less than an inch. I feel like we get heartbroken with an ounce. I feel like if you catch a fish with a deformed tail, you're really heartbroken by an inch. So that's tough, but that's the way they kind of do it. And we'll get more, and I'm going to go ahead and bring them in. We were talking about it. We were talking about the Old Town Bassmaster Angler of the Year race. You know, the Angler of the Year race is a season-long deal. We mentioned that 4 different kayak events for a season-long Old Town Angler of the Year race. And we've got our leader, and our leader happens to be down the street. I mean, I could have invited him over to the house for the podcast, but our Angler of the Year leader right now for the Old Town Kayak Angler of the Year race is Garrett Morgan, Conway, Arkansas, and he's leading that race by 3 points. And we have Garrett right here, voila, with technology. How are you doing, man?
Pretty good, man. Appreciate y'all having me on. I'm right down the street here in Conway, Arkansas. So, a little love here in the natural state, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Kyle, I have to, right off the get-go, I mean, we've seen some Elite Series pros with some awesome trophy man caves, but I think Garrett's flexing on us a little bit with all of those packs and the checks. I mean, he's so good at the kayak fishing series. He doesn't even have the 3rd place check up on the wall. It's just laying down on the side over there. He's not even worried about that. He's only getting 1st and 2nds. And speaking of that, Garrett, you obviously are leading the Angler of the Year race, and you got off to a great start, winning the first event of the year at Fork, I believe, which isn't too far from here. Honestly, it's about 3 to 3.5 hours from where we are in Central Arkansas. And so kind of walk me through your season so far, because kayak angling is pretty new to me. Kyle has covered the kayak series for sure, but it's something that's a different aspect that's really gained a lot of people's attention over the last few years.
Yeah, man. So just share a little bit of my journey. I did some co-angler stuff with my brother who lives in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and fished against some guys that have come up through the ranks, that were sticks back then that just beat our heads in. So I paid my dues for sure. And I had no idea that kayak angling even existed or there were tournaments. And one day I'm scrolling through Facebook and I saw this event that was here at my home lake at Lake Conway. And I was like, oh man, I'll try this out. And then contacted the guys, got the information, the whole measurement thing and the length was new to me. I was one of these guys that had been in a big boat and I was like, well, man, I don't know how this is going to work. I'm used to going by weight. But really it coordinates pretty well. I mean, it flows pretty well. Generally speaking, the guy that's going to win a kayak event with the longest length is also probably going to win the weight piece. So it took me a few tournaments to figure that piece out and really get comfortable with it. But I got pretty comfortable with it pretty quick. I won my first event I ever signed up for, and just got hooked right away, man. And, Lake Fork was a lake I'd visited numerous times in the past. So I was pretty familiar with that coming into this season. But previous to this season, as you'll see, behind me, I did a lot of in-state tournaments and had done really well. I'd helped start a local club here in Central Arkansas to grow the sport and spent a lot of time promoting that club, doing some radio stuff here locally to push that as well. And I probably spent the majority of my time just doing local stuff and pushing that. And I'd done some national events and cashed some checks, but I never really set the local scene aside to really go chase one of these, top level kayak trails. And coming in this year, that I made that decision. I said, you know what, the local tournament trail is at a good place. We have a really good board in place to carry that and keep building it. I've done and accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish at the local level. I've won the Angler of the Year here several times. And so let's go test the waters. Let's see, hey, if I put all that aside and I focused all my attention just on national events, could I go compete for an Angler of the Year title? Now, I will be honest with you. I wasn't sure which trail I was going to chase coming into the year. I had several of the national level trails on my list and, some regional events that were close to me. But when you come out of the gate and win the first one, it kind of makes that decision for you. So when you start the year out in first place, it's like, well, heck, why not go fish all the Bass Nation events? It just kind of seemed like it aligned perfectly for me. My main goal this year was to win a national level event. I'd done some third places. I'd gotten fourth at a couple big events. I'd been really competitive in the national championship a few times, but never could get over that hump of winning a national event. And so to go out and do that, my first event of the year, it was like, okay, now what? What's next? And it was, hey, let's go chase Angler of the Year. You're never going to have a chance to start the year out in first place again. This could be a once in a lifetime opportunity. So, I kicked around the idea of, man, what if I bought plane tickets and flew to Florida? What if I got someone to bring me a kayak? What if I just showed up with a bag of baits and a couple of hooks and some reels and borrowed 3 poles from somebody and went and tried to get points? And, I put it into play. I made it all work out. And I'll tell you, I barely made it down there to Florida in time. My flight got delayed out of Atlanta. I showed up at the lake sight unseen at 4 a.m. And one of my teammates from Old Town, Jimmy McClurkin, brought an extra kayak for me and let me borrow 3 rods. I put my reels on there, picked a couple baits, and just went out and fished. And, those points were very valuable. I finished 1 spot out of the money there. And then turned around and ran the Grand, which was right down the road from me, and I'd been to once before. And again, it's one of those things where things just kind of set up perfect for me at that one to be in the top 10. The area I fished didn't have a lot of big fish, but it was well protected from the wind. And, I felt like there was stable water because there was some deep water around. So I didn't feel like the temperature changed a whole lot. Going into that event, I was not even going there. I was not going to go practice there. I felt like I had eliminated that water. I didn't feel like it had the size of the fish that I needed to win the event. However, when conditions changed and I figured a lot of folks would struggle with even getting 5 fish, I was like, you know what? There could be some valuable points there where I practice. I know I can go there and get a limit of 15 to 16 inch fish. And that's exactly what I ended up doing. So things have kind of aligned. I've been very blessed in a lot of ways. A lot of luck goes into chasing one of these AOY things. So a lot of things have gone right. I'll take a breath and let you jump in there.
So let's talk about your early win. Obviously that propelled kind of the start to your season. Obviously got off on a good note, a lot of momentum. 201.75 inches, Lake Fork, February 5th through 6th. First off, I've talked to a lot of kayak guys, and there's pretty much a way to calculate inches per pound, like what the comparison would be. If you had to guess over the course of 2 days, what would that weight be, just for somebody that's maybe not familiar with about, how much 201.75 inches is? Because 100 inches per day is a lot if you look at the length.
I would say, in those 2 days, the average was probably somewhere around 25 pounds a bag. So about 25 pounds a day or so. Those fish were really, fat. They hadn't spawned yet. Some of those could have been pushing a little higher than that, but conservatively, I'd say at least 25 pounds a day.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Kyle.
I was just going to ask, so more like technical questions about that tournament, because obviously we want to kind of get your take on the tournament itself. So one thing I found really interesting when I was reading the gamer from that event was how you figured out which trees had the fish on them. So talk about that. Obviously Fork has been low all year, still is super low, will be low for the Elite Series event. So kind of give me an idea of how you were able to distinguish which trees, groups of trees had the fish on them.
Yeah, again, one of these things where things just worked out perfectly for me. The Kayak series has an off limits periods of Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday of the week leading to the event. Now, I didn't read all those details right away as I signed up, but one of our group texts with my Old Town teammates, said, hey guys, just a reminder, this weekend's off limits. And I was like, oh crap, that means I need to go tonight. I need to go fish tonight. It was like on a Wednesday, and I hadn't started my new job that I'm working now. So I had a week, where I was just kind of off. And so I ran down there, and, it happened to be the night that a cold front hit. And I mean, when I got up that morning to go fish, I was in my duck hunting waders. I had 4 layers of clothes on. And I mean, I think wind chill was like 28 degrees. And so it's like, hey, I'm down here. I'm going to go, see if I can find something. And, the first place I caught a fish was kind of mid back in a creek, and it was out from a boat dock. And, it was just, the tree looked a little bit different in that it had several branches off of it, whereas a lot of that was just, straight up and down vertical timber. But this particular tree was within 4 foot of another tree that was about 12 inches in diameter or so. And when I would drag my jig between those trees, I mean, I got hammered. And, it got so crazy. I FaceTimed my brother. I said, dude, watch this. I'm going to throw out here and catch fish. He's like, no way. I'm like, dude, I'm telling you, watch this. And I was catching fish with him on FaceTime. So I figured out, okay, listen, if you find a fish, there's going to be more fish there. And so what I did the rest of the day there in practice was I went and looked for that vertical structure, 2 pieces of timber that were within 4 foot, and I would drag the jig between. If I got bit, I marked that spot on my graph and I left. I didn't stay there and keep fishing. I knew there was going to be more fish there. And I had a cove that seemed like it had 500 trees in there. And so I went around to every little spot like that and hit that. And then, I worked things out where I could stay one more day. And I did the same thing out on the main lake because I felt, if those cold temperatures stayed, the first day of that tournament, you might have a better opportunity to find active fish on the main lake where the temperature wasn't going to change as much as some of those, coves that will fluctuate, being that they're a little bit shallower. Temperature gets cold, water temperature is going to drop faster. So that ended up, playing right into my hand as, the weekend before the event when I was wanting to go down and fish, but I couldn't because all this great warm water and it warmed up. Luckily for me, I had to go during the cold front because it warms up that weekend. And then that next week we had that ice storm and snow hit. And, everyone's kind of freaking out. Oh my gosh, the cold. Oh, what are the fish going to do? And the whole time I'm sitting there chomping at the bit, like, please don't cancel this tournament. Please don't cancel this tournament. Because I knew those fish were going to set up in the same spot. The conditions were going to be very similar. And when I went down there, I felt very confident going into the event. And, I didn't even have to go into that cove on day one. I ran my main lake stuff and had about 99 inches or so and ran back to the truck. And there was a point like right across the bridge that over the years I've caught a couple big fish on. And when I was down there practicing, I ran by it once with a lipless and caught like a 7-pounder. And so I was like, man, I got enough time to just jump in the truck and drive over there, which is a Toyota Tundra, by the way. So, kayak anglers are taking advantage of the bonus bucks too. I think I was the first one to cash that in. That's awesome. But so I ran around to the next ramp, dropped in. I had like 20 minutes left to fish. Catch a short 15-incher, throw back up there. I know where there's a stump on that point, and drug it off there, and boom, caught a 22-inch fish. And when that happened, and you're already at 99 something inches and you call up to 102, you kind of just know, okay, as long as I don't fall in the kayak and drown tomorrow, and I still have a whole other cove to go fish, that I haven't touched, that I know there's fish on, like this could really happen. And so kind of at the end of that day when that happened, I felt like, all right, well, just take care of business tomorrow and it should work out. So.
Well, Garrett, there's strategy involved, and you mentioned it in 2 different aspects so far. You mentioned going to the Harris chain with minimal tackle and just a couple reels, simplistic, and got enough points to maintain and still be in the Angler of the Year race, and now leading it, obviously. And then you mentioned the Toyota and going from spot to spot, because we mentioned it before you joined us on the podcast. We talked about how whenever I thought of kayak fishing, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was like, oh, that would be cool to get a little boat like that and to go to this creek or a stream, a place I can't get my 21.5-foot fiberglass boat. That would be a great place to do it. And that's the only aspect that I thought of utilizing a kayak in, is places that I can't get my normal boat. But then we talked about all the big bodies of water you guys are fishing with kayaks now. Some have trolling motors on them, some have pedal drives. There's probably regulations on what you can maybe have. But then as a person who fishes out of a bass boat and has my whole life, I don't know how much tackle I would pack. I would feel like I would either overpack or completely underpack in a kayak. And then also the strategy of using 20 minutes to drive by truck to your next ramp or location versus trying to pedal across the lake, or only staying in a little area to maximize time, but they're not the quality of fish. So there's a couple different strategies there, what you bring and where you go and how you balance that you guys have obviously dialed in. And have you kind of found that sometimes you find you're running around too much in your truck and not out in the boat, or you feel like you just have way too much stuff and you don't know what to dial it in on?
I think in years past, that was something that I made the mistake of doing, like trying to bring everything and trying to just, have 8 poles rigged up so I didn't have to, cut something off, retie, whatever. Going into the Grand Lake event, I can tell you, I took 4 poles. And the reason why I did that was I knew I was going to go under all those cables, that are notorious on Grand, and fish behind those boat slips. And in a kayak, what an advantage, right?
Oh, I'm jealous.
See all the boaters
I'm jealous.
that go to Grand and they struggle with all the cables and everything behind the walkways. And here we are as kayak anglers. My teammate Mark Pendergraph, who finished 3rd, actually did the same thing. But it kind of depends on the lake, what strategy you're going to take into it. Some of those lakes that are more open, like Fork was, especially with the water being drawn down, I knew I wasn't going to be way in the back of creeks and be under a bunch of trees. So I knew I could take more to that and not have to worry about getting poles tangled up on tree limbs and things like that. But I definitely feel like I've scaled down quite a bit on my tackle. I've really tried to hone in on just a few key baits, to really focus in on what the fish are doing based on that time of year. And, just kind of say, hey, listen, either we're going to catch them on a jig day or we just ain't going to catch them. And, that's what I went down there to Fork. I mean, that was my mindset. Either I'm going to catch these fish on a jig and I'm going to just blow it out of the water, or I'm going to zero. And I think being okay with that decision in the past, it's like, man, I don't want to get embarrassed. I don't want people to look at the leaderboard and see Garrett's only got 2 fish. I'm comfortable with that now. I'd rather win 1 or 2 events a year and, maybe fail at a few and be okay with failing than not win. I want to go into it with the mindset of, I want an opportunity to try to win. And I think minimizing your tackle, your rods, what you're bringing to an event really can help you stay focused, and you don't get, kind of scattered all over the place of really not giving a bait an opportunity to work. You're switching too much. You're already thinking about the next bait you're going to use, or maybe I should have been throwing this wacky rig and slowing down. And it's like, if you just limit, you go in with a good game plan and stick to it, I think you got a better chance.
Kyle, I feel like Kyle, that Garrett Morgan is like Jason Christie or Greg Hackney of the kayak series, that he's like, I don't care about zeroing. I'm going to win or I'm going to finish last. And that's been a great recipe for Jason Christie. I just needed to say that, but Kyle, go ahead.
Go ahead, Garrett. Go ahead.
Funny story. Jason won right before our grand event.
Yeah.
He won. Okay. He throws the same spinnerbait on Grand that he won that event on. I was walking around my local kayak shop here in Conway, and I just happened to see that spinnerbait that he throws. It's got the blue and the green in it. And I picked one up, never thrown it in my life, tied it on that Thursday. The first 16, 0.75 inch fish I caught out of a drain that has some water running off of it behind one of those boat slips was on that spinnerbait. Every 16-inch fish I caught was pretty much because, that post, with Jason holding that spinnerbait reminded me of watching those old videos of Graham. I was like, that spinnerbait does pretty well over there. Maybe I'll pick that up. So shout out to him for, sharing that little secret bait that he uses out there.
So Garrett, let's talk a little bit about kayaks themselves. So I assume you're still in a 10.5 foot Old Town PDL. Is that correct?
Well, I actually have the autopilot, which is a 12 foot. And so that has a motor. And I had one of those last year. And when I went into Fork, I was waiting on the new one to arrive. So I didn't have it yet. So I always keep my 10.5 foot pedal drive, just because, man, you can pick that thing up and throw it in off the side of the road. And, people have tried to buy it from me for years. I'm like, no way. I'm not selling this thing. I'm going to keep it. So I use that for Fork. But I use a different boat for the event down on the Harris chain that I'd never been in, which was Jimmy McClurkin's, but it was an Old Town as well, 10 foot with a motor. But that autopilot I used at Grand, man, that thing's handy, especially when you're kind of weaving in and out of those boat slips and getting in there behind there. But the spot lock on that in kayak fishing, I mean, there's just nothing like it, whereas if I'm trying to position my fish on that measuring board and I just caught it, I'm trying to get the right length, because depending on how you kind of angle that fish, you may get an extra 1/4 inch. So as an angler, you're going to take your time making sure you get a good photo to maximize the length on that. That could take a few minutes.
You don't need to be beating up against the land or something. Yeah.
Right. You'll look up and you'll be 100 yards from where you were. And, it's like, oh, what happened here? But when you have that spot lock, you just kind of motor out in front of those docks, hit spot lock, and then take your time getting your pictures. And it's a huge advantage over folks that don't have that. And of course, fishing windy points was something I hated to do before I had that spot lock. So I will say that autopilot, it'll change the way you fish. It'll help you stay on fish without getting blown all over the place. But kayaks in general have really advanced in technology. You're seeing folks putting, the active live targeting sonar on their kayaks as well. I haven't gotten to that stage yet. Down the road, I probably will have it. But it's advancing quite a bit in a hurry.
No Lake Atkins or Conway bass will be safe once Garrett puts that on his boat. Go ahead, Kyle.
I was just going to say, so still on the kayak thought, give me an idea of somebody, like if somebody was getting into kayak fishing and kind of wanted to get started, give me an idea of what somebody would want to look for just to get started in kayak fishing. Because I think, we're seeing more and more that people get interested in it, but I would use myself an example. If I was wanting to get in a kayak, I wouldn't know where to start. So give us an idea of, a good beginner's kayak, somewhere that somebody could start in and begin fishing tournaments out of.
Yeah. I think the biggest mistake a lot of folks make is going to one of these big box stores, which they have some reputable brands, but the challenge there is your staffing is going to kind of have minimal knowledge on, what's going to fit your need. Probably the best thing to do is find a local kayak shop in your area. And regardless of the brand, of course, I fish with Old Town and I think that they make a great product. There's also other brands out there that make really good products. And you're really looking for something that's going to fit your style and fit what you like to do. If you like to flip and you like to stand up and flip, you're going to want a boat that's a little bit bigger. And, they make kayaks that you can stand up in. I mean, even my pedal drive, that's a 10.5 foot, Old Town, I can stand up and flip in that thing and set the hook and not turn it. So I think there's a big difference. Sorry, I'm getting a call here.
You're fine.
Send that to voicemail. Anyways, I think there's a big difference in, the send inside kayaks that people will go float a river in that can kind of turn over easy, and these fishing kayaks. Fishing kayaks are a lot more stable. I also say you're better off waiting and spending a little bit more money on a kayak than going and buying something that's a little bit cheaper at a box store. What you're paying for is the same thing as when you get tires, right? So you can go get those 4-ply tires that look like they're good mudding tires, but you go drive out in the national forest here in the Ouachitas and you may puncture that thing, versus if you go ahead and, pony up the money up front to get a 6-ply or 8-ply tire, you're paying for the thickness, right? Same thing with a kayak. The lighter the kayak, generally the less stable it is, the thinner the plastic it is, and the cheaper it's going to be. Those thicker kayaks, they're going to be more stable. They're going to hold up longer, and it's going to be something you can use for a long period of time. Now, there's nothing against starting on that lower end. I did that. But I'm telling you, as somebody that made that mistake, I wish I would have just saved my money and, gotten something that was a little bit higher end. That was something I could use a lot longer. So, but Old Town, I feel like makes a good paddle kayak in their sportsman line. They have 10-foot and 12-foot paddle kayaks for folks that like to do that. And then the pedal drive systems that they have, allow you to get some good exercise and fish, and you can stand up. Again, the Sportsman line that they have. And then, of course, the autopilot's your top of the line deal there, and you're going to have the motor, and you're going to be able to spot lock and do all those pieces with it, which, you know, I got to tell you, when I moved to that spot lock, I had to kind of up my fitness game a little bit because I wasn't paddling around as much. I was just hitting a button. So I had to kind of shorten my gas station stops and not get too many Dr. Peppers on the way. It'll put a little weight on you in a hurry too.
Well, speaking of Old Town, this will be the last thing we bother you with, but the Old Town Bassmaster Kayak Angler of the Year race. Some guys don't like to talk about it. I remember texting Brandon Polnick just a few days ago with an updated graphic, the Angler of the Year race. Totally forgot. He doesn't look at the Angler of the Year standing, so he doesn't know where he is positioned. If you don't look at it, I'm sorry, but you are the man on top by 3 points right now and going into one more event, and it's Smith Lake, which kind of fishes like a lot, other than the herring factor, like a lot of the Ouachita's, Greer's Ferries of Arkansas. And some aspects, maybe even a little bit like Hamilton when you get around the docks. But have you thought about that in May for the last event of the season, trying to win that deal? You've got a 3-point lead over second, a 9 over third, and then about a 30-point lead over fourth. And then it gets, you know, it's kind of a 4-man race because it's about 70 points to fifth place. So I don't know how many points you can gain and lose in a given event, who's still in it, but those four at the top still seem within shouting distance of each other for that Old Town Angler of the Year race.
Yeah, man, you know, I am somebody that looks at it. It's something I am chasing. And I tell you, I got some good competitors, some good anglers that are in the mix here. And, you know, we'll fish Smith Lake. And then in October, I think we wrap up at Pickwick.
Oh, you do?
So
okay.
We have 5 full events, and we get to cull one of them. All right. So they're going to take your top 4 events. So there's a couple guys that when they get their 4th event, they're going to be right there in the mix, with Drew Gregory being one of them. And, you know, when you look at the competitors behind me, you know, I see Drew and I see Eric. Of course, Largen has been good all year.
You just named all of our guests on today's show, so that's a good thing. It's a good picks that we made.
But, you know, the thing about Eric and Drew, let me tell you this, and even Mark Pendergraft, if he creeps his way in there, these are guys that have fished 2-day tournaments. And all the events, except for 2 of them, are 1-day events. And so I feel like, you know, really the separating factor at the end of the day is going to be that last event. That's a 2-day event. And so when you have folks like Drew, you have folks like Eric that have shown the ability to go to 2-day events and cash checks at high level against high level competition, you know, those guys are right there in the mix. So, you know, kind of watch out for those guys at the end of the year to creep right back up in there with me. It's going to come down to the wire. You know, I've been shocked to get the lead and then hold it all year. But again, this isn't my first, you know, rodeo either. I've won the Angler of the Year for Central Arkansas 4 years in a row. Wow. And generally when I get that lead, I don't tend to like to give it back. I know there's a lot of study. There's a lot of events, a lot of things that could happen. I've really just been blessed to be in the position that I'm at so far. But I'm going to do my best, and, you know, wherever it lands, it lands. Looking at Smith Lake, you know, I do like some areas that I've been seeing in video that set up for my strengths. You know, I'm hopeful that when I go down there May 7th, you know, it pans out the way I want it to. I'm going to go look at a few things, but I've already eliminated a lot of my tackle. So I'm going down there, you know, with a specific mindset to do a specific thing. You know, probably take 4 poles or so and just kind of see what happens. So, but I've been studying, as I'm sure my competitors have as well. But that's also the good thing about putting the local scene behind me. I'm not spending a bunch of time pre-fishing these lakes, going to those events. That's taking, you know, my focus off of the Bass Nation series. So hopefully I can give it all my attention and go down there and stay competitive.
Kyle, it sounds like he's going to just put a jig in his hand and go to work once again. But Garrett, we appreciate you having it on the Inside Bassmaster podcast. This is the kayak special. Like you mentioned, I got off my train of thought there, but yes, the Kayak Angler of the Year is based on 4 events, but there are 5 tournaments for that purpose if you have to miss one. And so that's why you mentioned some of those guys outside the top 10 that maybe only have 3 or 2 of the 3 events so far under their belt. So good lookouts there. Appreciate you joining us, Garrett, and good luck in the last two events of the season as you try to wrap up the Old Town Bassmaster Angler of the Year race.
Absolutely. Appreciate y'all having me on.
Yes, sir. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Garrett.
All right.
Kyle, that's a big time, an angler there. You know what I'm saying? That is a heavy hitter for the kayak series, and for Garrett to really lay it out there. That I was very informative. I'm very impressed with our first kayak interview.
Absolutely. And that just goes to prove exactly what I was just talking about with some of these guys that are in the kayak series are absolute sticks. I mean, that's just the truth about it. I can relate exactly to what he was saying there at the beginning, fishing tournaments in Hot Springs and fishing against that competition, because that's what I did growing up my entire life. So
getting beat in the head by the sticks there as well, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But like we said, I mean, you can just listen to Garrett and tell that, he's a fantastic angler. He's proved that all year this year. And, he kind of talked about it, but it's going to be really interesting to see how the Old Town Angler of the Year race plays out for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that aspect of ditching your worst event can really help some of these anglers who have missed a tournament. We've had Fork, Harris Chain, and Grand Lake. If you've only fished two of those and you're in the top 20 in points, the opportunity there to jump up is huge. And it looks like it when you look at the Angler of the Year race. It looks like we have 8 anglers, maybe 10 anglers that have fished every event so far. They have 563 points or more, but 8th place is 641 points or more. So we may have 8 to 10 who have fished every event, but he mentioned those guys 11th and 12th, Drew and Eric. We will talk to them today as well on the podcast. And those guys have only fished 2 events because they have less than 500 points, which means they have knocked it out of the park. Obviously, Drew winning the Grand Lake event, Eric winning the Classic this year. And that's obviously not in the Angler of the Year race, but that does segue us perfectly to joining and bringing in Eric Siddiqi, our 2022 Bassmaster Kayak Series champion from the Classic, which was over at Lake Russell. And it looks like our guy Eric is out on the road fishing a tournament. And I know that gas station, and I know you know it too, Kyle. But looks like Eric is on the road, and it looks like he is at Waterfront Bay and Tackle right there on the shores of Lake Gunnersville. Eric, how are you?
Good. How you doing, man?
We're doing great. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. I'm Ronnie, and that's Kyle, and we are so excited to talk kayak fishing today. We get to talk with our Angler of the Year leader, Garrett Morgan, just a few minutes ago, and now we get to talk to our Classic champion from Lake Russell and a guy who is still in the running for that Angler of the Year race, because Garrett explained the whole culling of your worst tournament, and so it looks like you fished 2 of the 3 so far. And man, what's it like? Kayak series fishing has blown up the last few years. Being able to do a Classic event now with Bassmaster, doing the whole series, Angler of the Year at stake, and you have already claimed one of those big wins.
Right, man. It feels good. I've been doing this for about 7-8 years now, and we've all kind of been waiting on it to really blow up and get there. We all really felt like it was going to happen at some point, so it's really good to finally see it starting to get there. A big part of that is some other big companies coming in, like Hobie starting their series, and Bassmaster, you guys starting your series, and that's really like taking it to the next level. So it's been good to see, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
So let's talk about that. Obviously, Ronnie mentioned you winning the Kayak Classic. Talk about that. Would you have ever imagined 8 years ago that you'd be standing on the Bassmaster Classic stage hoisting a trophy over your head for a kayak tournament?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Talk about the emotions of that then.
Man, it was exciting. I've been waiting a long time to hold up that trophy. I've been watching Bassmaster since I was a kid, and I really taught myself how to bass fish, and got a little help from Bassmasters and watching those guys and stuff. But yeah, never really got a boat. Just always bank fished my whole life till I bought a kayak and started. I watched Chad Hoover go and start doing the kayak stuff, and I was like, I can do that. So bought one and started doing it, and just kind of went from there. And man, standing up there and being able to hold that trophy up was just unbelievable. It was an unbelievable feeling. I couldn't believe it. And we had to wait a day
Yeah,
to find out if we
exactly.
won. So that was really tough. And I really didn't know. I had no idea if I'd won or not. All I knew was I took the lead by a quarter inch before they turned the board off. So it was a little stressful.
Yeah,
to say the
so
least.
that is an aspect that not only did you have to wait a day for the results to come out, and you have to stand on, it's not like you're backstage and you hear the results. You had to stand on a stage in front of the Bassmaster Classic crowd as they were funneling in to know or not know. You didn't know if you won or not, and then you win by less than an inch. I told Kyle, I said that is like losing the Classic by an ounce. Like less than an inch has to be the equation. It might even be, for scale wise, it might even be closer than that if it was like half an ounce. But for you to win that, a guy from Cincinnati, Ohio, I believe that's where you're from. Do you still live there? And I mean, is that a hotbed for kayak angling? I know that you obviously have big bodies of water in upper Ohio, the Great Lakes and whatnot, but I know Ohio fishing is tough, but getting back in some of those creeks and some of those rivers, it probably makes it a whole lot easier compared to the fiberglass guys that have to be restricted to some places,
Yeah, it is. It is a lot easier to be a kayak fisher. There's some good places to fish in Cincinnati, but all of them are like gravel pits and stuff like that. Some of the state lakes, they aren't as good. I mean, if you catch fish on them, then you could pretty much catch fish anywhere, which has probably been a big part of the success I've had. Being able to travel, like Guntersville is just incredible, and with the pressure it gets, it's unbelievable how good this lake is. I mean, yeah, this is where I really want to be. I was just at a huddle house with some buddies eating before I came over here, and I was walking out and listening to this old couple just talk about bass fishing and talk about the wrap my buddy has on his truck and stuff, and I was like, I just love this place. It's so awesome.
It is a bass fishing hotbed. I mean, Lake Guntersville is a special place, and that's where you are for a tournament this week. But I have a question for you. I know we've used the college series, the high school series, the opens as the co-angler. There's a lot of different avenues to make it to the front of a bass boat to compete at the highest level. Is there any desire for top level kayak anglers like yourself to transition to a fiberglass boat and make that, or is this like the elite series for you guys and this is where you want to be, and no matter how many kayak events you want to win, you have no desire to maybe jump to the front of those boats? You'd rather stay in this type of environment with the inches aspect and kind of how big the kayak series, you guys are probably the first in the door of this explosion for kayak fishing.
Yeah, it's been discussed between some of the top guys to transition over, and just I'd like to see somebody do it just to kind of show that we're as good as those guys are. I don't particularly care who it is, but there's some great fishermen in the kayaks these days. Cody Milton's amazing, Russ Snyder's, Josh Stewart. A lot of those guys can, I think, transition and be successful out of a boat. It's definitely different. I think it'd probably be easier for us to transition into a boat than the other way around. But
100%. I said that at the beginning of the podcast. I said, I'm afraid of flipping one. I'm afraid of having too many rods. I'm afraid of my legs getting tired, and I'm 5 miles from the boat ramp. Like, I'm afraid of all of that, but I would love to experience it on a smaller body of water that's more, confined to get the hang of it. And I'm also afraid of my right. Jig hook set flipping my boat over. That's just me, but I don't know if you got to do any different adjustments, but I know you guys run the top level kayaks.
Yeah, it definitely, there's a learning curve with a kayak. It's not easy being able and sitting down and stuff. You gotta, I mean, there's just so much to it. It's a lot. So yeah, it's taken some time for me to, get it dialed in and everything, and everything's second nature now in my kayak. I don't even think about a lot of the things I do that, so sometimes it's hard for me to, when somebody's starting out, to tell them everything, because there's certain things I just don't even think about anymore that to tell somebody. So yeah, it's, but yeah, it's what I love. I love it. I swear every time I'm in a boat, I wish I was in my kayak. So it's something about it.
So let's talk about your win there in the kayak championship. Russell Lake, like we already mentioned, 188 inches, beating second out by 1/4 of an inch. That, like we've already said, that's incredible as it is. You know, you went against your running and gunning style and fished in one specific area pretty much the entire event. Give us a little rundown of that, kind of your bait rotation, and give us just an idea of how that whole tournament played out.
Well, I really tried to find some different water in that area. So my first day of practice, it was just me and Ike that launched from the ramp I did.
That's good company.
Yeah. So, you know, that was good to see, I guess, you know, good and bad, you know. It's like when people see me in a ramp, some people who are like, oh, great, I picked the right ramp. And then people who are already on fish are like, Siddiqi, damn it. You know, so it goes both ways for guys. But so I got out there and I found them quick that first day. I was able to get out there and I started running the pattern I wanted to, you know, looking to see if there was some, you know, underwater culverts and stuff like that on that riprap, and found some small fish and just kind of kept working my way all the way back. And I just found them stacked up in the back. They had a bunch of bait pushed back there. There's a road bed that runs alongside, so there's like a lot of different things that I like to do that I could do there. If the fish pulled off, I figured they'd probably pull right to that road bed anyways, or maybe on some of the wood back there. So I was feeling pretty good about it. I checked the weather, and the way the weather looked, everything was going to hold up. The wind was going to blow the right way to keep that bait back there and everything. And I really felt like it was going to hold up. So, you know, I went and checked on them every day, tried to find some other stuff in the area, and I really didn't see anything that was worth leaving there for. So, you know, I went out there that first day and took it a little easy on them, got my 5, and then I pulled off and I fished that. I got all my fish in practice on slower moving stuff. I really wasn't trying to catch them too much, but they were eating like a shakehead really good, chicken rig. Let's see, I caught a couple on a Carolina rig, had a bite on a football jig, and when I wasn't really trying to catch them. So then tournament day rolls around and I couldn't get them to touch any of that stuff. So I ended up going with a 3.8 and a 4.3 inch Kayak and Tennessee shad and a white color. And then I had a Z-Man diesel minnow rigged up. So I was kind of showing them some different swim baits. Like I was able, in the morning, the first day, I saw one bust. I threw a Kayak over there and it ate it. So I was like, all right, here we go. So I'm going to throw this. So I just pulled off and threw that and was able to get my 5. Pulled off, went to the road bed and grabbed the biffle bug, and I caught my biggest bass of the day. You know, just trying to take it easy on those fish. Just figured, you know, I'd probably be able to pull a good one off a road bed. I like fishing them. So I was able to pull a 19.5 inch largemouth off of that. So that worked out and I kind of took it easy. And so I was feeling pretty good for that second day. I was going to finally be able to catch them the way I wanted to all week. And I figured I had some crappie fishermen in the back of the creek that came in that first morning and kind of messed things up for me early, I felt like. And I was like, man, if I get that to myself for the first hour, I think I'll really be able to catch them. And I did. I got it to myself and I didn't get a bite. I was like, oh gosh, I'm in trouble. This is not good. And then I just kept chucking that swim bait. I'd switch from Tennessee shad to, you know, a white and throw the Kayak and throw the Z-Man. I was just going back and forth. And it seemed like I would throw. And like the first time I'd switch, that's when I'd get there. So just kind of grinded it out. Like it's picked up as the day went on. It's almost hard to remember now, but I had like a 15 something I called with a 16.5 at the end of the day. And
huge call. Yeah.
And then, yeah. And I had a buddy come and he was, you know, just watching me with a drone and stuff, standing over on the bank watching me. I was fishing pretty close and I turned around and I caught 17.5 or 17.75, I think. I'm like, yeah, he's like, how big was that one? I was like, 17.75. He's like, that gives you the lead back. I was like, give me it back. I was like, so as far as I knew, I had it. So that's when I realized I was in a dog fight. So because I really never, every time I looked, I was in the lead by a fair amount. So I had no idea that Nickling was able to catch him again.
That's awesome. That is a very cool tournament, especially for it to come down to a 1/4 of an inch. And you guys can look at at what we consider Bass Track, you can look at your TourneyX leaderboard, but they do shut it off at a certain point. So tell me at what point do they shut it off in the day? And is there plenty of time left to make a big move? Do you guys have to be off the water or just lines out at a certain time? What does that kind of aspect of the end of the day look like?
Yeah, they usually shut it off with about an hour or 30 minutes to go in the tournament, so nobody has any idea where anybody's at. Then people have an extra hour after the tournament's over to submit their fish and get them in. So you really have no idea where you're at. You know, you don't know if somebody sandbagged all day and just never submitted fish or anything. So
does a lot of that happen? Do people wait, or is it frowned upon and the tournament director's kind of like, you got to put them in. If you catch them at 9 a.m., don't wait till 3 p.m., that kind of thing?
People do it. It's definitely frowned upon, but people do it. I've known guys that have done it and dropped their phone in the water though also. So
oh no.
Yeah. So there's good and bad things about both ways of doing it. So, but I like to get mine in a lot of times, especially if it's a bigger tournament. I know people are watching. I'll try to get them in, but a lot of times I'll wait till I get 5 before I submit my fish. So
I would definitely, Kyle, I would take one of those old orange life jackets and kind of knife out a rectangle and put my phone in that, so that if I dropped it, it's going to float around with me, so I wouldn't lose all of my catches for the day. Look, there it is. He's got a strap.
I got a float attached to my phone always.
That is awesome.
I was fishing a tournament on Kentucky Lake out on the ledges, and it was just an online, and I was like, I'm going to do one more, catch one more, and I caught like a 22-incher. I get in, I'm taking a picture. This is before I have a float on my phone. I take the picture, I pull the phone back up to look at it, and when I go to lift it up, it knocks it out of my hand into the water, and I watch it sink to the bottom, and I had to drive home with no phone, no GPS, no nothing. So ever since then, I've always had a float on my phone. I won't get in my boat without having a float on my phone.
Well, last thing I wanted to talk to you about, Eric, is I don't know, early on in the kayak, I just feel like I see a lot of spinning rods. And so I was always like small bodies of water, finesse presentations, unpressured fish. So I'm just going to, you're going to be able to catch them easy, but you got to be stealthy. But that's not always the techniques. There's a lot of power fishing that goes on. You're talking about Carolina rigs.
You're good.
You're talking about crankbaits. You're talking about big jigs, all kinds of things, even top waters, things like that, flipping. What would be your advice? Maybe a tip to a young kayak angler or someone wanting to get into kayak fishing for one or two techniques that they wouldn't think about, but that are very manageable to fish in a kayak?
Well, I won my first tournament on a Ned rig. That's always good to catch your fish, and getting those 5, that's a big deal, especially for confidence and going back to fishing, the way you should be fishing, the way you fish in practice. And so I'd say find a bait you're comfortable with and confident in that you can catch 5. If I'm fishing shallow, grass or clear water, I'll throw a fluke, something like that. Just get my fish, and especially if I know it's going to be a tough tournament, just making sure you get those 5. So that's one of the things I always tell people when they're starting out. I'll give them a few baits to, you can't overlook a Senko. That thing's got more fish than anything has. So that's always a good bait.
Yeah, and you can rig it 5-6 different ways probably on a tournament day. But Kyle, do you have anything else for Eric, our kayak classic champion from Lake Russell?
Just a congratulations on winning the championship. It's an awesome accomplishment. And I know me and Ronnie are both looking forward to the rest of the year, seeing how the Old Town Angler of the Year points shake out.
Yeah, that's one thing. It's always good when our Angler of the Year leader, Garrett Morgan, hangs up with us and says, he skips everyone on the list and named literally every guest that we were having on the podcast today, because he said, watch out for Eric and Drew. They're outside the top 10, but they haven't fished all the events. So when it comes down time of getting your 4 events, they're going to be in the running of it. So you're in good company. that you're confident in who you are, but to get a shout out from down in 12th place in Angler of the Year from the leader, he's watching, and he knows who his competition is. So he knows he's got to keep catching them.
Yeah, we know Garrett's good. He's going to be tough to catch, but I feel pretty good about these last 2 tournaments. I've always wanted to see one on Smith Lake, so I'm really excited to go there. And Pickwick's where I learned how to bass fish. I've been bass fishing Pickwick since I was probably 5 years old. So if there's anywhere that could be considered a home lake, it would be that one. So I feel pretty good about that one being the last one. If I get a good finish, maybe a top 3 at Smith, I feel pretty good that I'll give myself a chance at Pickwick to do something.
Well, Eric, I lied. I got one more quick question, and it's kind of a logistical deal. On the Elite Series, we have a minimum length that we have to catch to count as a keeper. But when we do the catch, weigh, release format at Lake Fork with places that have big slots, we can go. We have a new minimum. It has to be a certain minimum, but it doesn't have to be outside the slot or whatever. Slot fish can count. For you guys, do you have a minimum as well that it needs to reach? And is that across the board, or still the same as bass anglers in other tournaments, that it's dictated on the state and the lake, for size limits?
Yeah, well, since we release our fish right after we get a picture, we could, use any fish. Like Fork is a great place for us to have a tournament because we don't have to worry about that slot. But every tournament pretty much nowadays is like a 12-inch minimum. Sometimes you'll get one that's 14, but usually 12 is like the standard, and that's the minimum size fish that you could count for a tournament.
Perfect. Well, Eric, appreciate you joining me and Kyle for the podcast today and dropping some kayak insight. It's a very special podcast. It's been a long time in the running, and so we're excited to get it done with some of our biggest names in the kayak sport. Hey, good luck at Guntersville this week in your tournament, and at Smith and Pickwick for our Bassmaster Series kayak deal, and the Old Town Angler of the Year race. So that's Eric Siddiqi, our classic champion this year. Congrats, man.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Kyle, we've got two hammers we've already talked to today on the podcast, and I'm excited about the other 2 hammers we get to talk to as well. But it's a different world, the kayak bass fishing scene, and I'm very excited to learn a lot. Like I mentioned that through the last interview, but see some of these guys that are confident that, hey, we could transition to a bass boat if we wanted to. I had to ask that question.
Yeah, and that's an interesting take. And he mentioned, how long he's been fishing from a kayak, 8 years, he said, in these tournaments. And, he really is one of those names that is well sought after. And, people recognize, obviously, he mentioned that about the boat ramp thing, how he pulls up to the boat ramp, and that's usually a good thing or a bad thing for people. Even before I started getting to cover some of the kayak tournaments, that was a name that I recognized, and definitely interesting to get to hear some takes from somebody like Eric that has been around and seen the progression and seen how much it's grown. That's definitely going to be a name that we're going to keep hearing in the kayak series. And, like Garrett mentioned, definitely a name that you need to watch out for the rest of the year in the Old Town Angler of the Year race.
Yeah, and another guy that I'm going to go ahead and bring him in as well. We've just got the best guest today just rolling in. Justin Largen. He is one who is in the thick of that Old Town Bassmaster Angler of the Year race, sitting in second place right now with 2 events left. Obviously, he has fished every event so far, but we do have one of our big-time guys, and he's getting set up there. But Justin Largen, he's our champion, Kyle, from the Harris chain. Justin, can you hear us? Can you see us?
Gotcha. Loud and clear.
If you want to rotate your deal, it's like it rotated before. Yep. And now snap it back. There we go. Perfect. So yeah, we were just talking about it. This is like the winner's circle show for the Bassmaster Kayak series. We've had Garrett Morgan on, our Angler of the Year leader. He won Fork. We just talked to Eric Siddiqi, our classic champion. He's in the Angler of the Year race around the 12th place spot. And now we have our second place in Angler of the Year and our Harris chain champion, Justin Largen. So tell us about it, being a winner, and now your mindset's probably a little different because you're trying to win that Angler of the Year race as well.
Definitely. It was it was an awesome event. It was a really cool experience. It was unexpected, but when John handed me that trophy, it was surreal. Having a trophy that says Bassmaster on it is it's like a dream. But yeah, it was a tough tournament. It was kind of up and down for me. I had a great practice, great first day of practice. I found a bunch of fish on beds. I went back to them Friday, and last day of practice, and they were gone. So I kind of went from being super excited to being just disappointed, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had a backup area. I wasn't confident in it, but it ended up I decided to go to it on the tournament and or on tournament day, and it just worked out. It was a better area than I initially thought. Had a couple bigs in it, and it worked out for me.
So one thing I found super interesting winning, your tournament, you're throwing a striking hybrid hunter over submerged grass. But the one thing that really I thought was super neat was that you had watched the Harris Chain tournament, the Elite Series tournament there, and noticed that Ray Hanselman was throwing that bait. Talk to us a little bit about that. Obviously, throwing something different other than a vibrating jig or some, a trap, something maybe more, standard, I guess, for fishing submerged grass, how you were able to make that bait work, and probably areas that, I imagine some other people may have been fishing at some point.
Yeah, I definitely watched the coverage. It's a bait that I knew about. I follow Todd Castledine on social media, and he's talked about it a bunch. So I had a few, Potomac River, I kind of consider my home body of water. I lived in Northern Virginia for a long time, but I never really played around with it much. I caught a couple fish here and there, but I felt like the fish were getting so much pressure down there that would be something different. So many guys, especially in our kayak tournaments, throw that chatterbait or other vibrating jig now. I want to throw them something different, and it just sort of worked out. I think the area that I was in was out of the way enough. I don't think the bass boats could get in there. And I did see some other kayaks in there in practice, but during the event, it was just me on that stretch. So I think that made a big deal too.
I thought it was hilarious, and I had to laugh at my dad. Kyle's been in this position. He's been a camera boat and a photographer for kayak events. And I said, it's very funny. It's obviously going to be logistically hard to cover a kayak event out of a kayak taking photos. I don't want to lose my $5,000 camera in the water, but my dad was the camera boat driver, and he said, hey, I'm doing the kayak series as the camera boat driver for the photographer. What takeoff are they using? And I was like, Dad, their kayak, they launch wherever they want to. It's not like it's a shotgun blast off and the best one with the trolling motor on 100 gets there. So tell me about that aspect. You found a spot to yourself, but the whole strategy of kayak fishing is finding a place off the beaten path, but also it has to have a good population of fish to last in a multi-day event, to have enough inches to win, and for that's protected. But when the conditions change, you're not out of luck there. So there is a lot of strategy that goes into kayak angling that isn't just what baits you select.
Sure. I think you said it well. There's a lot of strategy that goes in, and it seems like most tournaments, you can spend a lot of time looking at Google Earth, but everybody else is doing the same thing. And there's so many times when I might not have bass boats in the area, but there's so many events where other kayakers find the same stuff, and you end up kind of sharing an area. It's just, everybody's so good that there's certain lakes where maybe there's more backwater stuff, more places everybody can spread out. But in some of these events, it's just amazing to me how many guys are launching in the same place and wanting to get on the same stuff and really finding the same group of fish. It just, this one, for whatever reason, I happen to find them, and nobody else did. It hasn't happened very often like that for me. So it just worked out. It's a blessing.
So Justin, Ronnie already kind of mentioned it, of course, but sitting second in the Old Town Angler of the Year standings right now, just 3 points behind Garrett Morgan. Talk to us about your outlook on the next two tournaments, obviously Smith Lake and Pickwick. Tell me if, you've had experience on those lakes, or, kind of just your general outlook on those final two events, trying to close the door on Angler of the Year.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm also very well aware of how good these other guys are. I think everybody that you talk to today, these guys have been doing it a long time. They've been doing it longer than me, at least at the national level competing. So just being kind of in the mix is pretty special for me. And I know a couple guys like Drew Gregory and Eric Siddiqi, they didn't fish the first event, but you get a drop. So, they're gonna, I think they both finished in the top 10 in the first two events. So those guys are right there. There's a bunch of guys who are really close. It's going to be close at both events. And I really feel like, I almost feel like I have to win one of them in order to really lock it up. Because, look at Garrett's finishes. He's got, I think, a first, a 17th, and a sixth. Mark Edwards is another one who's had really good finishes. It's, I feel good that I've had three kind of, top 20 finishes. I feel like I need to have one really good tournament out of these next two, and maybe two really good ones to really have a shot. It's just that close. There's that many guys who are that good.
So bass fishing in America is blowing up. Obviously, the sport, we always talk about growing the sport, and how I've kind of said, hey, we've grown it. We just don't need to burst that bubble. But it's always been in the aspect of tournament bass fishing from a fiberglass boat, our high school, college, opens, elite series, growing those levels. The kayak series has been quietly growing before Bassmaster. It was ever on Bassmaster's radar. And now that it is, I can see the explosion even more of where now I can fish a league like Bassmaster across the country, nationally, not just in my own state. And I can still do it my way, the style of fishing I like. What has kayak fishing done for the sport of bass fishing? Because you look at the Angler of the Year race and you've got Arkansas, West Virginia, Ohio, places that have good lakes, but are not necessarily notoriously known for great bass fishing, or the lakes that they have that are small, that can't have big tournaments. Kayak people or anglers are able to thrive on them. So it brings a lot of states involved that maybe wouldn't be in the bass boat scene for other tournaments. And so are you on that aspect, or are you a bass boat fisherman that has found a love for kayak fishing, or is this your introduction to the sport from a kayak?
I started with a small John boat, and really I think what made me switch was just the simplicity of kayak fishing. I didn't have to go drop 20,000 to 50 or 75,000 on a bass boat kind of to play. There's not that same barrier to entry. And there's guys that'll have $10,000 kayaks, but by the time you add all the electronics and the motors and everything on, it's an investment. But for me, it's a lot. What made it fun for me was I could go to work, have my boat strapped on top of the car, grab it after work, tuck into a small little creek, fish a couple hours, grab a rod or two, a little bit of tackle, and just have fun doing it that way. Now I've upgraded, I've got a nice Hobie now, but I'm still not running a motor.
So your calves are like this big then? That's what you're telling me.
I wish, but I kind of like it. It gets me exercise too. That's one of the things I like about it. But it's I think it's really cool. The last two tournaments, guys won without motors. It really shows you don't have the same barrier to entry. Anybody can, almost anybody can spend, $500, $1,000 on a simple kayak, and take the gear you already have and go out there and compete. You don't have to have a great rig. I think there's a ton of fishermen out there that are, sort of at the grassroots level that maybe couldn't do it. I mean, I know I couldn't do it at the elite series level with just the cost of it. And I think it gives a lot of those people kind of a platform to shine. So, speaking for myself, and I think all the other guys, we're really grateful that B.A.S. has kind of stepped in and brought, a platform for these kayak fishermen to kind of shine.
Now, one thing you mentioned there, obviously, is kind of different guys' setups. Obviously electronics are becoming very big in kayak fishing as well. Talk a little bit about that, how far that's come, obviously with forward-facing sonar on kayaks now, and give us an idea of kind of your electronic setup.
I'm kind of, I guess, stubbornly old school. It's getting so competitive that at some point I'm going to have to break down and get nicer electronics and get the motor. But for right now, I'm running it's a Lowrance. I can't remember the exact model, but it's a lower end model. It's got side scan, but honestly the screen's so small that I can't really effectively use it. So I'm using down scan and really just sort of standard 2D most of the time. And honestly, a lot of time fishing the Potomac, I mean, it was stuff that I knew, creeks I knew. I kind of knew where the holes were. I like not having to worry about it, not having to think about charging batteries and stuff. But it definitely makes a difference. There's definitely guys that are using the forward-facing sonar now and using it effectively. But you can still get in that shallow backwater and use the 2D sonar or no sonar and be effective. I think just for me, knowing water temp, knowing depth, being able to see kind of a difference between 10 feet and 15 feet or 20 feet, where maybe you can't see that deep. That's where the electronics plays.
So Justin, you talk about, we got him back after a little bit of a phone interruption. You talked about how you're a little bit stubborn and you're not necessarily on the electronics game like other anglers are. But what would be your advice to an angler? Maybe 2 or 3 lures that you utilize a whole bunch while kayak fishing that anglers can really, succeed without electronics.
Honestly, a stick worm to me is really versatile. I like, missile baits, the 48. I have caught a lot of fish this year on that, and it's kind of something you can. I'll throw it real shallow, weightless. I'll put a little like 16th ounce jig head on there and fish it a little deeper. It's that to me has kind of saved me in some tournaments this year. Moving baits like spinnerbait or a chatterbait up shallow, it's hard to beat that. And then maybe a bigger plastic like a D-bomb, something like that, for fishing that, that dirtier stuff, real heavy cover. I love to flip that thing. I actually got back from a fun trip at Fork, and that thing was, I caught some big fish down there for me anyway.
Well, and that's something that I've always thought. I mentioned it with our last guest of every time I see a kayak angler, I think about a spinning rod and maybe finesse presentations, but we got guys, frogging and flipping grass. And I feel like I'd have to be standing to do that. Have you found it to be comfortable now learning? Do you flip, grass lines like that sitting down, or do you have a raised platform? Do you stand up and getting up and down over and over again when you come to a presentation like that?
My preference is to stand. I like to stand, and most of these higher end kayaks anymore are really stable. But I prefer to stand when the wind will let me. Since I've gotten the pedal drive, like within the last year, I've gotten more comfortable, doing it from a sitting position. It's a little tricky with the hook sets. It's different. You can't generate the same power with the hook sets, but it, I guess I'm looking at it like you got to do what you got to do. If I'm able to stand, I like that. I love getting in places where I have to pick the drive up and just stand up and paddle. Like it's a paddle board, getting in places that are kind of that skinny. But yeah, you can do it either way. And there's guys that'll fish seated all day, but if I can stand, I like to do it that way.
Well, last thing we'll ask you, Justin, I lie about it every time I say last question, then I ask one more question, but we do have two more events left, Smith Lake and Pickwick. Do you have a tournament so far since you won the Harris chain? Do you have a tournament that you want to cull out, that you have maybe a poorer finish that you want to drop off? If Garrett has a first, a sixth, and a 17th, and you're 3 points behind him, you have to have either two top fives and a bad finish or the same kind of finishes. So do you expect to need to cull one of those? Or like you said, you got to win one, maybe one of these last two, you got to win two of the four events to even win Old Town Angler of the Year?
I'm hoping I don't have to call one. My worst finish so far is 18th. So for me, that's good. But I feel like I've got a little bit of a cushion. I can have a bad one with that 18th and still have a chance. But I know, like I said earlier, the guys like Eric and Drew and people like Casey Reed, they're not far behind. And those guys are always in the hunt. So I really do feel like I have to win another one to, I feel like it's going to be, a couple of guys within 5 to 10 points by the end of the season. So we'll see. I've got a little. I've been to Pickwick once, never been to Smith, so we'll see what happens.
A little bit different than the Potomac, but maybe a little bit like Smith Mountain Lake. Maybe just pay attention to the Elite Series events. We have Pickwick and some events at Smith, and we'll clue you in on what it is. But we look forward to maybe talking to you at the end of the year as the Old Town Angler of the Year champion. Justin, we appreciate you joining us. Kyle and I, we're learning so much about kayak fishing today on the Inside Bassmaster podcast, and I appreciate you taking time to talk to us while you're actually practicing for an event.
Hey, thank you guys for having us.
Awesome.
Thanks, Justin.
Kyle, we got a great lineup of guests, and we've mentioned that. I think that it speaks for themselves when they mention each other, and they don't even know our guest list. I didn't tell them who we were having, but they've mentioned all of our guests, and it's kind of different than the Elite Series Angler of the Year. Our Elite Series Angler of the Year champions have not won an elite event the last few years. The Angler of the Year has not won an elite event, but for the Kayak Series, you have to win an event, it seems, to even have a shot, or you have to be you have to do a couple top fives. That to me is impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no room for slipping. These guys that are up there at the top, like you mentioned, their finishes are so consistently solid. Neither of the two have had a finish outside of the top 20. I mean, I think of Justin and Garrett. That in itself speaks volumes to how consistent you have to be. And, the flip side of that is how easy it would be to fall out if you had a bad event. If you have back-to-back events that are worse than your worst event at this point, you're going to be in a bad position because, like you said, being able to cull out a tournament, if you have one bad one, you can get over that, but two bad ones consecutively, and that pretty much takes you out of the race entirely.
Yeah, we've been able to see that the last year or so when we had a COVID drop event for the Bassmaster Elite Series, how it maybe impacts a guy who has a 95th place finish, drop that off, and his worst after that is 77. You gain 18 points right there. But yeah, it seems like Justin's finishes, he's got the first of the 18th and probably an 8th place finish based on what Garrett's finishes were. So I'm excited about it. And our last guest today, we're still waiting for him to join in, but it's going to be a good one, and it's going to be a good bookend to it. And he mentioned it. We'll just go ahead and queue up and tee off our guest. But Drew Gregory, and he's somebody that I knew when I mentioned some of these names on the Angler of the Year list that I knew beforehand. Drew Gregory was one of those. I believe he had a Tech Tip Thursday for Bassmaster a few years ago. And he did it all about kayak fishing as well with a reaction style approach. To see him win at Grand Lake was very cool. And to see him be mentioned just outside the top 10, but as one to watch in the last two, Drew Gregory is going to be a good one.
Yeah, Drew Gregory is definitely a name that is extremely recognizable in the kayak series. You could say a pioneer in the kayak series. And if you take a look at Bassmaster.com, he's actually written a little bit for us. I'm sure we'll get into that. And he's got some extremely valid points on kayak fishing, and definitely puts a lot of time and effort into continuing to grow the sport.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Drew Gregory, he's our last guest, and he's going to be the one that wraps up the show. I said there's probably no better person that probably talks as much as we do that could wrap up the show better than we do. So Drew, welcome to the Inside Bassmaster Podcast, our final guest for the kayak edition today, and congratulations from Kyle and myself and the rest of the Bassmaster. This is kind of the winner's circle. We've had all the winners this year, and you're the freshest winner of them all. Grant, not only how you're dressed, the headset included, but the championship trophy, that was very new, just a week or so ago.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And nice to see my reputation precedes me here. I definitely can talk, and I admit to it, but you guys are right there with me, and just want to say thanks for having me on. Ronnie, huge fan. Love what you do, man, and God's blessed you with an incredible acumen for all things Bassmaster, and I love your commentary on live. So keep up the good work. And you know what, this Kyle Jessie guy here too,
not too shabby.
Not too shabby. Had a little chance to work with him, with the other guys, Chris and everybody else over there at Bassmaster.com, writing some columns as well. So, but thanks again. Yeah, definitely really cool to have a Bassmaster trophy. It's something I've always wanted. And once you guys announced that kayak series, it was always a goal. So pretty awesome that I've got it so quickly here, just a couple years into the kayak series.
Well, Kyle, I'm already impressed because 2 of our 4 guests are at home. The other 2 guests were on the road fishing a tournament, practicing, and the man caves trophy rooms of the 2 kayak anglers that are at home are more impressive than any trophy room I've ever seen. I mean, there's no point in putting wallpaper in Drew Gregory's house. Just going to be checks and trophies all over the wall. So Drew, your reputation does precede itself, not only in being a great talker and fun and enjoyable, but the kayak series. What was it like taking home the trophy at Grand Lake? Had you ever been there? And also, what did it take to get it done? Because Grand is a place this time of the year that pumps out some big fish, inches wise and poundage.
No, for sure. And I'd never been to Grand, and I absolutely love going to places I'd never been to before, which is why I had it circled on the map. I'm really excited to fish that one this year. And it is actually sets up in my mind. It's set up similar to Dardanelle, and the fact that half of the lake has some Ozark streams flowing into it. The other half is more your plains and farmland. And I won on the Hobie series on Lake Dardanelle in 2020, the year I ended up taking the AOY over there in that series. So I just told my wife I had a really good feeling. My dad was originally born there in Oklahoma. So we got some old family roots before the Gregory side of the family moved down to Texas in that Sabine River area. Anyway, so I was excited about it, Ronnie. It just stoked to get over there and check it out. And the way I kind of put it all together, and this is the way I like to fish. And people know this about me. If to put it in bass boat world terms, I'm definitely a Jason Christie, John Cox, Keith Carson. I'm more of, you know, the guy that takes it further as far as I can than I think anybody else will. And that's the beauty of the kayak. That's the whole point and why it was even created for fishing, at least, to get into the waters where bass boats stop in the back of those creeks and rivers and coves and cannot go any further. And then the kayaks begin, in my mind. And of course, the beauty of the kayak is the fact that it still can go offshore and, you know, all kinds of insane water, Erie's, your St. Clair's, wherever it can go there. And it's perfectly safe doing that. And we can still reach the same fish the bass boaters can. But for this tournament, in my mind, I always start with trying to find some water that the bass boats can't get to. And that's just what I enjoy. You know, a lot of people know that about me. I'm Mr. River Bassin is kind of the phrase I coined, and I ran a tournament trail about river bassin for a while. So people know that about me. I'm a river and creek guy, and that's what I look for. However, shocker here, plot twist, didn't happen that way. I did find a little sneaky area off of Main Lake Cove. That was a small spawning pocket because the rivers were a little blown out. And I just found the fish were pulling in there to spawn. And the lake kind of came up about a foot between Wednesday's practice day and tournament day. And it came up almost a foot. And that just kept more spawners kept coming in that warmer little spawning pocket, which had a nice south facing bank. So, and it was a high bank there. So if you can imagine, your wind comes from the northwest, that cooler wind all spring long, it's getting great protection. The sunlight comes from the southern hemisphere. It's getting pure sunlight. There was no trees blocking it. It was 5 degrees warmer in there. And they just pull up onto the bank and just kept filling up all day long. More fish kept moving. So that's kind of how I got it done with this Z-Man cross size jig mostly. So that was pretty cool with a green pumpkin pro crawls on the back and a few on the sling blade spinnerbait. But I can go into more detail if you want, but that's the short.
Kyle, we're getting a top lures gallery as well of the baits that got it done. That is awesome. But Kyle, what you got for Drew?
So Drew, you kind of hit on this point there, and I wanted to bring it up because one of the articles you had written for bassmaster.com not too long ago mentioned exactly what you talked about: fishing in areas that bass boats can't get to. And ultimately, like you just mentioned, that's one of the biggest advantages to fishing out of a kayak. Do you think that's one reason you've had so much success fishing from a kayak, is because you've been able to, understand that and be able to target that in most places, as where, this is not a something I came up with, but I don't think there's anybody that's ever said, I think you're at an advantage fishing from a kayak on an offshore brush pile, but fishing, from a kayak in these hard to get areas that a bass boat can't reach gives you a massive advantage. Is that something that you've been able to hone in on in your career, and
Sure.
obviously have had a lot of success over the course of your career?
Well, I'll put it like this, Jesse: yes and no. And what I mean by no is you got to go where the winning fish are, no matter where it is on that body of water. You can't
Sure.
just say, well, because bass boats can't get there, you magically. I wish it was that way, because I fought to get to some places during pre-fishing and practice that are so remote, so wild, nobody else would even dare try to get there. And that took me all day long or half a day to get there. And it's just absolutely thumbs down. Didn't have the population, didn't have the right ecosystem for whatever reason. What I thought was going to be there wasn't. And I wish that all that hard work would always pay off to get to the wild places. And sometimes it does, but it really all still comes back to learning the bass and why they live where in their entire environment, the entire ecosystem, and breaking it down the same way that on the boater side, those guys do in the Elite Series and the Opens and all the top guys there. That's what it really comes down to. And I am good at, figuring out, I think I'm a little bit, better than most, just due to my experience, figuring out which creeks and which rivers, because, like all the elite guys, you only got so much time to pre-fish and graph and figure a lake out. You know what I mean? So you can't go explore the back of every single creek and little backwater area or pocket, or maybe a small culvert or somewhere a bass boat can't get under. You just don't have time for it all. So you've got to be able to learn, it just, nick some of those off the list, those little waypoints, obviously, and hone in on the few that you really think is going to be where the fish are, regardless if it's a place that boats can get to or not. So you can't get too locked into it on the one hand. On the other hand, that's what I love doing. And the boaters aren't there. But then on the flip side to all this, to kind of bring it full circle to even live scope and all the electronics now, you can't, like other kayakers are going to be there too, because they know that's what the tool is best for. So it's just like, okay, well, all the boaters now have live scope, and a lot of these guys are going to be doing that. So then maybe somebody thinks, well, everyone else is zigging, I'm going to go zag back to the bank, where it's freed up that fish. So now it's just this game you got to play with the other anglers and the fish, and it's what I love, about the sport.
Kyle, I feel like I got to get a kayak now, because better than anyone, every trip we go on, if I don't have tree limbs in my boat on the front deck, we're not fishing the way I like to. We get up in some stuff that I cannot say on here because I'm trying to resell my boat, at a certain point. And so, but yeah, that getting back in the small waters is very cool. And it's a different aspect of the kayak fishing that we don't get to see other ways. That's why guys like the Tin Man John Cox kind of make a name for themselves on doing it against the grain. But you mentioned that sometimes when everyone's going against the grain, that becomes the grain. And so for you, how are you going to be able to chase down this Old Town Bassmaster Angler of the Year trophy? You have been mentioned. I'm not going to blow your head up here, but we've had 4 guests today, 3 excluding you, and all 3 of them have mentioned for the Angler of the Year race, you better watch out for Drew Gregory down, even though he's outside the top 10, because he did not fish the first event. You guys get to cull an event, 5 tournaments, and you don't have to count one of them, and that frees you guys up to miss one. But you're right there, not too far behind with 2 events left, Smith and Pickwick. Are you feeling confident in your ability to go against the grain there, or go with the grain and win?
I don't know. I mean, I'm confident, but at the same time, dude, fishing, like, look what happened to Christie, right? He wins the Classic, the next tournament, he's next to dead last, right? Well, the fish and the Lord will humble you sometimes. And I had a couple events earlier this year where that happened. I was in the running to win the championship, the kayak championship. I was in 4th place after day 1. I was up in the river, and they cut the water off on day 2, even though the generation hotline said they were going to run all day long, of course. Right. So I think they're holding water back for the Classic guys on Hartwell, because we were on Russell Blowett. So I'll blame the Classic guys for that. And my bite died. And so every time you think you're confident about something, you'll get humbled in this sport. That's for sure. So I am confident, but at the same time, I know the reality of bass fishing is you just can't win every time. It's not even, even think about a sport like golf. Tiger Woods didn't make every cut, and he wasn't even dealing with another animal, another object that's playing a role in this thing, so you can have the best casting ability and skill, but those fish move. And now you guys are right for sure that the fish, I guess Smith Lake is the next one. I got to focus on that one at a time. And, I just got to go where the big ones are, whether it is the main lake stuff and the bluffs and offshore, or it's back at the creeks. I guess I'll figure that out during pre-fishing. But yeah, like I said before, a lot of times the bigger the ocean, the bigger the fish. And even though you want to go with your instincts to go fish the skinny water, a lot of times the size just isn't there, and you do have to go into that bigger water with the bigger bait fish population. So it's going to be interesting, and I'm excited about Pickwick. I actually tied for first for a kayak bass fishing tournament there last year, got second by tiebreaker. So I've had some success there as well. So we'll see. Those are the last 2, and then we'll just see what happens. But there's a lot of good hammers in this trail. There's a really, really strong talent field. I know Mike Iconelli said the same thing when he's fishing kayak events, and I'll tout, those guys as well. So I'm not counting anything yet. We'll see.
So let's jump back a little bit. You already showed us some of the baits, that you focused in on at Grand Lake. Let's talk about that tournament a little bit more. Fishing in staging areas for the spawners, and then on the tournament day, you had to make some adjustments, it sounded like. Give me an idea of just kind of the general rundown and how you were utilizing the baits you showed us to end up winning that event.
Sure. So it's really cool, actually. In pre-fishing, I was there on the first day that we were allowed to be on the water, which is Wednesday. Tournament is Saturday. So when I get there, I'm just throwing the sling blade spinnerbait in this area. It just kind of looked like a potential spot where you might find some spawning fish or some getting ready to spawn. And they were in sort of a ditch, if you will, and a drain leading into that area, hammering this spinnerbait. I mean, like train wrecking it. Okay. So obviously, and I caught some 16, 17-inch fish, nothing like gigantic, but I caught 4 in that class. I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. It's not a very big pocket. I don't need to catch any more, even though it's Wednesday. I still don't want to, burn that place down yet, because this is a 1-day shootout. Some of these Bassmaster Kayak Series events are 2 days, and some are 1 day, as we're, the trail's still figuring out what the best format is. I personally hope we go to all 2-day next year, but it worked out for me in this event, so I'm not complaining. But anyway, they were hitting that spinnerbait hard. That's the Sling Blades spinnerbait from Z-Man. And I had a second skirt to it to bulk it up a little bit more, displaces a little bit more water, helps them see it in that murky Oklahoma water. And then I got the minnows from Z-Man on the back as well. It was a trailer with a chartreuse tail. And then I added a chartreuse Colorado blade. So I've got a lot of visual here. Yeah.
So what's the difference before you go onto the jig?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of a big gold one, or instead of a black one, or maybe an orange kicker, what made you do chartreuse for not only the skirt? We always see the skirt with chartreuse in it, or maybe the dyed tail, but that blade is something that we don't always see. And if we do see a chartreuse and white maybe combination, it is willow leaf, not Colorado.
Right. Yeah. I wanted to really be able, this is a 1/2 ounce, by the way, really be able to slow it down. Obviously we know that's what the Colorado blade will do, displace more water. But the reason why, I chose this over the gold or the silver, I just felt like that water clarity in my area, Ronnie, it just wasn't really going to displace a lot of light with the flash, which is, great to have the nickel or the gold blades. The flash, like, to me, when it gets really muddy, I guess these painted blades and I look in the water and I can just see with my eyes, which one do I see better? Right. It's like when you're making a graphic, you know what I mean? For anything online, social media, people have done that before. And sometimes you need white because it's a black background to stand out to do your text. And sometimes you need black because it's the sky, background, and blue or whatever, or white. And so I always think of watercolor, you want that polar opposite that's going to pop the most. And I just felt like that was going to pop the most. So that's why I chose that. Plus it kind of matched the skirt and everything else. And man, it just looked pretty, dude.
It does. It definitely catches fishermen. But I like that second skirt aspect you said. That's something. Is that something you saw somewhere else, or have you been doing that for a long time to make that look like a bigger deal?
Yeah, actually, no, I didn't see it anywhere else. I just kind of did it myself. Just, toy. I'm a tinkerer, and I've actually got some bait designs coming out with Z-Man and some other stuff I've been working on myself as well that you guys will, hopefully see in the near future.
Maybe you can send us some.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'd love to do it. I love to do it. But anyway, that's just something I did just because I felt like my skirts would, they get nicked and the pieces of silicone come off anyway. They get thin. And I really wanted them to be able to feel and see and just not miss the bulk of what I wanted them to hit. So that's kind of why I did that. And it does displace more water, makes it go a little bit slower as well. But yeah, after they were hitting that in pre-fishing, they on tournament day, you go in there just with this dream in the night before, this vision of, I'm gonna throw the sling blades, I'm gonna catch a ton of fish, it's gonna be amazing, and it's gonna all work out the same way it did on Wednesday. And of course you get in there and they're not in that same ditch at all. Like, you're just throwing and throwing and throwing. You can't believe you're not getting bit. You're like, where did they go? But then I did catch one really sluggish fish that nipped this, no lie. And I've got this on GoPro. As I'm pulling it out of the water with 6 inches of line left, I'm going to put the rod down to pick up another one, like a chatterbait or something else I had on. And it bit and it slipped in real slow as it's getting, coming out of the water. It was almost out of the water when it hit. And I just lifted it up and put it right in the kayak it was so green with 6 inches of line, even though I had, 30-pound SX1 Sunline, it just snapped the line. It just went crazy. And I'm just covering up on it because I'm in a little 10-foot Crescent ultralight kayak. And there's not a lot of room for that thing, to flop around and go somewhere. So I had to cover up like a loose fumble and secure it. So anyway, that fish was a 16 3/4, a solid fish. Then I catch another one as I work my way around the pocket on the spinnerbait, but it hit the exact same way. Like, I'm talking 3, 4, 5 feet out, love line out, sluggishly, just lethargically kind of chase it. I said, man, they're in a different mood. They're doing something different. I wasn't sure then what to do, but as I worked my way out of that pocket, I fished some other areas, tried to expand and let that area just sort of calm back down and reset, because it was the afternoon during pre-fishing when I was catching them there, not the morning, and it's early now. So I thought, let me let them reset. And then I just happened to see one of those willow trees with about 4 or 5 trunks that's in the water. And those trunks, most of them, about 3 or 4 of them, were gnawed down by a beaver. So they're barely out of the water. And it's just it was too cumbersome to really fish effectively with a spinnerbait or a chatterbait. You're pulling it away from that piece of structure too quick. You couldn't really get it all past it. And I just had this jig here ready to go. And I flipped it in there. And this is a 3/8 ounce jig, but the Z-Man Elastec plastic floats. So it actually fishes more like a 1/4 ounce. So I got the weight, which is so beautiful because I have the weight for a bait caster, right, of a 3/8, probably even more because it's a big chunk of plastic on this crawl. So it's probably throwing a little bit more than a 3/8 in terms of my casting ability and accuracy on a bait caster, but it's fishing and its performance is more like a 1/4 because the buoyancy neutralizes it and brings it back. So it falls nice and slow, and I'm fishing in very shallow water. It's probably 1.5 2 foot around this tree. and it just thumped and the line just started running out. And I set the hook and it was the heaviest of my 18 1/4. I had two 18 1/4 inch fish, and this one's probably maybe a little over 4 pounds, probably nice, fat, healthy, Grand Lake stud. And man, it was the clue I needed. If I don't get this bite, I'm telling you guys, if I don't get this bite, I'm such a power fisherman. And obviously it's, you probably make fun of me here, but yes, we all know I talk a lot. I'm spastic, ADHD, but it suits my personality. I cannot fish a Ned rig. I can't. Yeah. So you get it.
Cut from the same cloth.
Yeah. Perfect. So I'm lucky I got that bite pretty quick on this jig because it clued me in, and I went back into my primary area with the jig, and I made a nice skip cast under a piece of buck brush that had some water on it, now about 8 to 10 inches of water, not much at all on it. And around those roots, a fish thumped it, took off out in the middle. I set the hook and boat flipped her in. And this fish actually came off in the boat right when she landed in the boat, spit the jig. I tried to cover up on her like the loose fumble. And somehow, I've never had this happen in a tournament, she slithered up through my, rain pants and jumped out of the kayak. And then she actually went on out of the kayak, and my kayak was up against the bank, and she didn't know where she was. So she literally just went as fast as she could under my kayak onto the bank, ran herself onto the bank. And I'm trying to grab her off the bank now because we can't get out of our kayak, and trying to grab her. And she flops back in, goes back onto the kayak, gets away. But it was a 17 to 18 inch fish, a nice 3.5 pounder. I was not happy, obviously, but it at least clued me in. And about 10 minutes later, I got an 18 1/4, my second good one, to go along with the other 18 1/4 and those nice 16 3/4, and then started calling my way up, and got a 20 1/4 was my big, not too much longer, and just started to realize, they're so shallow. I can't believe it, because they have to spawn shallow in the murky water for the sunlight to penetrate, to do its thing for the spawn. And I figured that out, and they were just really all stacked on that bank I was telling you about, the south facing bank, getting all the sun. And once you do well in a tournament and you fish for a whole day, and it just all comes together. Like it made so much sense. I was like, oh my goodness, it's blocked from the sun. It makes sense why they're there. There's even little undercut roots that got some water on them. Not big roots or anything, not big trees, just small little trees like they have out there. And there's like protection almost where you would noodle a catfish out of. They're kind of undercut like that. And I promise you guys, they were spawning in the undercuts because the sun was coming at such, the southern hemisphere. It's coming at that angle where it's still getting full sunlight in there. And they felt so good and protected having the earth right behind them in the wall. Like, who's going to get, to my fry when I have to just block this one entrance, and that's it. Because they would come out of there, thump it, take off. I don't know if they're protecting the bed or eating. I don't really care because I don't waste time. When they thump it, I hit them. And then that was it. I was using I was using Sunline as well with the Flora, the FC Sniper. I think I had 16 or 20 on that one. So that was the deal, man. What a day.
Now, let me ask you this.
Ahead,
did you get that episode on GoPro as well? Because I think we would both love to see that.
Oh, I got it all on GoPro. Yeah, I have it all. And it's it'll see the light of day at some point. Actually, I've got a little project in the works with one of the these outdoor streaming services. We'll see if it ends up becoming something. But I've been filming them all this year for that, to maybe collaborate with them and bring it all my entire season. And we talked earlier about John. You talked about John Cox or Christie. I can't remember who it was. And they're against the grain. And I'm going to call this show, if it actually comes to be, against the current, because I go against the current, what everyone else is doing. So, but yeah, I've got it. And maybe I'll put some small clips up here and there where people can see some of these funny moments and before that all comes out, which may be the winner, because like you, Ronnie, I've got little ones at home. Life is crazy. And this footage just stays there for a little while. And then I have to kind of go through it and sort it all out, because I'm picky about, what I want to show, what I don't. It's hard, because we're not like the elites, where if it's live and it's like, hey, this is what it is, I'm getting all this exposure on live and all my sponsors are happy. That's one thing. To spot burn, it may burn spots when that's shown on live and people can figure out where they're at. But we don't have that. We're essentially potentially helping, our competitors, right? Maybe see our spots, and then it might turn around and burn us on another tournament there, because we obviously go back to a lot of these same places. So we'll see. I'm gonna go through the footage and definitely show some stuff. It was a pretty exciting tournament. I was stoked.
So what's next for kayak fishing? We've talked to every angler and talked about the advancements in boats and technology. And you mentioned you're only using, or you were using a 10.5 foot, ultralight, kayak. Was that that's a specific maybe for that event, or is that your go-to all season? But what's next for kayak fishing? I mean, will we have to do Bassmaster Live of kayak? We're gonna have a kayak out there with a cameraman following you guys around, or what's next for the sport? Because it's a huge kind of explosion that's different. I mentioned it with other anglers. We talked about growing the sport of fishing through high school, college, opens, elite series, all of that, getting people who don't fish into fishing. Kayak angling has just been exploding, and that's something that's like, now we've gotten to the point where Bassmaster's involved, other big trails are involved. What do you see as a heavily invested angler, the next step to really shine a light?
I mean, live is definitely what we're all kind of waiting for. It's a little bit, more difficult because, a lot of times boats can't get to where we are. So I think the solution is probably going to be, once cell, technology and the signal, maybe it's there already, but it's going to have to be run through the GoPros, where you just have a GoPro on the kayak. And I'm sponsored by GoPro, been with them for 10 years. They're amazing. They've just been a great partner of mine. And I'm hoping that maybe, hey, maybe Ronnie Bassmaster can talk with GoPro a little bit. Let's work something out, and let's get it where we can stream, at least the top 5, top 10 on the final day of our tournament. Maybe have 2-day tournaments and stream the final day. And because once we know that after the first day, we know who's on them, so hopefully we'll be on them again. Get 5 or 10 anglers with, or maybe you can have some camera boats if the guys for sure are in these bigger boats, out there offshore. There's no reason why we can't have a boat following them. I know it's another resource, though. It's going to take a little bit more resources because it's not just one camera guy on the angler's boat like you see on the Elite Series. That's part of what's next, for sure. And I can't wait for that to happen because, some of the most exciting clips in Bassmaster history are, Iaconelli breaks his line. He's jumping off the side of his boat. He knows the rule. You got to keep your hand on the boat. You can't completely leave the boat and grab the line. Anything cool like that, getting a fish out from underneath the dock, crazy insanity like that. And of course, fighting big waves, big weather, all that in the bass boat is awesome and exciting. But to me, this kind of stuff happens in a kayak every single trip, and it's so entertaining. I mean, it really is. So when that goes live, oh man, the entertainment value, we'll never have to sort of conjure up anything. It's not going to be needed. It's already there. And so, but that's what I think. And the other thing I was going to say to the other part of your question is, I bring 4 kayaks to every single event because Bassmaster allows motors. Okay. So I've got a solo skiff that's also made by Crescent Kayaks. I've got a CK1 Venture. I've got a light tackle and an ultralight, and they're all different. They're basically 13, 12, 11, and 10 foot. They're all for different purposes. 2 of them, the bigger ones, have the motor capabilities with motor guide. And then I have the biggest motor possible, 36 volt, 109-pound thrust. Why would you not have a 250 horsepower?
What's that thing go like 8 miles an hour, 9 miles an hour? How fast can,
like 7, 8 miles an hour. It can go pretty fast. But so I got that, run those Lithium Pros over there, and I fly, man. It's pretty impressive on those things. When it's just like any tool. Sometimes you need your power poles. Sometimes you don't, sometimes you need, whatever, sometimes you need live scopes. Sometimes you don't. So I have it all. And I think the next step for elite level kayak anglers is they're going to start to realize, oh yeah, like these kayaks these days are mini boats, and they can't do some of the stuff that I like to do and get in little backwaters and sneak holes. So yeah, I'm going to need a second boat or a third for different purposes. So they all serve a different purpose. The funniest comment I've ever seen was when you guys posted on Instagram yesterday, on the Bass Nation Instagram. You posted a picture of me with some an article that I believe Chris Decker.
Chris Decker, yeah.
And he said, the guy said it was a picture of me in the trophy and my little 10-foot ultralight, and the guy goes, and that guy looks like he needs a kayak sponsor. And I was just dying laughing because
plot twist.
Yeah. He didn't understand. Like, I've got 4, I've got everything I have all the stuff. And I chose that one. It's a tool. And that, was able to reach the area I wanted to fish. It was the right tool for the job in this particular situation. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. So that's kind of, but the cool thing is, here's what's ironic about all this. And that's when it's your time, it's your time. When God wants something to happen, he'll make it happen. And I'm telling you, it's crazy that you guys are talking to me today because we just announced the launch of my new kayak design with Crescent this morning. And it's been in the work for 2 years. So a lot of folks out there don't know, these, kayak guys, I've had Signature Series kayaks before with Jackson when I started the fishing side of that company back in the day. And then COVID, of course, changed our world a lot. And now I'm with Crescent. And this is the first design I came out with Crescent. It's called the Shoalie. It's named after the shoal bass in Georgia. And it's a really cool kayak. We got a little minute-long teaser so you guys can check it out. But I'm definitely going to have one of those in the arsenal for next year. And man, I just really hope that through all this, in terms of what's next for kayak fishing, is that podcasts like this one and all the other major podcasts will almost, I hate the fact that we're almost like called kayak anglers, because we're just bass anglers. You know, Bass Angler Sportsman Society. It's not Bass Kayak Angler Sportsmen. It's not Bass Boat Sportsmen. It's the love of the fish. That's where it's at. And it doesn't really matter what you're fishing out of. And people can go between all the series the Bassmaster provides. It's incredible how people can zig and zag and go be a co-angler in an open and go back to a kayak and then go, you know, hopefully work your way up to the elites and through the Bass Nation and whatnot. So I hope that eventually we'll get to the point where, yeah, we have to say he fished the kayak side or whatever. But a lot of these podcasts and the radio, the media will start to kind of see us in the same light that, man, this is what we chose. But the knowledge of the fish and the species is right up there with some of the top anglers. And the more I think we get kayak anglers on here, the more we'll see that. And that's just what I hope to kind of keep pushing to the mainstream, because then your Toyotas and other folks, which they're going to do an article, by the way, because they do drive a Toyota. So kudos to Toyota for jumping in on this as
bonus
well.
bucks.
But I really hope that's right. Bonus bucks has already started. And I just hope that we can continue to grow this a little bit, you know, more mainstream in the kayak. And not that we aren't respected now, but I just think that sometimes that some people still might think, oh, they just didn't have the money for a bass boat, or look at him just trying his hardest to get. Yeah. And it's like, it's not really the case.
Yeah, and that's something that Ronnie and I actually spoke about before we ever interviewed anybody, was the fact that the more tournaments that I've been able to go to, the more I've realized that to be true, is that there are some absolute hammers out there fishing the kayak series that, like you said, are just choosing to fish out of a kayak because it's what they either started in, that's just what they prefer. And I'm right there with you. I definitely think that it maybe gets a bad rep from some people, but the more that I have been around it, I can confidently say firsthand that what you said is definitely true.
Yeah, it's kayak is a form of identification, not a
right.
slight or a stigma, you know. And I am more unaware about kayak fishing, and I have my own preconceived notions than probably anybody, but I know the value of them. And it's just kind of, oh, you guys go out on Lake Erie and those things, or like, man, if I set the hook, I'd flip that thing over. And it's like, Ronnie, you're not as strong as you think you are. These things are great platforms. It's very great to learn that. And so, Drew, you're one of the innovators. That's awesome. I don't know of an Elite Series Pro that has a signature series boat, you know, coming from the factory. I know Jason Christie's had some influence on the new Express and whatnot that's came out, but there's a lot of different aspects that kayak anglers, or that bass fishermen that fish out of kayaks, let me correct myself. Yeah. They have an influence on the industry. And so I'm excited to see what the next couple of years looks for, or what happens with it. And I've even mentioned it during this podcast that I would love to get one, and I would love to try it on a couple of local lakes that are smaller, confined environments, and get the hang of it. Because my style of fishing, I mean, I don't even want a graph, you know, just give me a 6-foot stick. I use my fishing rods, but like, give me something to just know the depth with a stick, and we'll just go into the dirt all day. But yeah.
Love it, man. That's exactly what I love to do. So now it's exciting, and we'll see where it goes, because, you know, it's all about growing the sport and growing it, not just growing the sport for the sake of commerce and business, whatever. We work in this industry. So of course that's great,
yeah,
but it's about doing it the right way. And I know what this has done for your life. You know, Ronnie and Kyle, myself personally, you know, kept me out of a lot of trouble when I was younger.
The best sport in the world.
It is. So it'd be a shame not to share that passion and love. So it's about growing it the right way as well, and teaching people to respect the resource, which Bassmaster does such an amazing job at as well. And so we can sustain it for the future generations as well. So now I'm excited. And a little fun fact here, there will be about 500 to 700,000 fishing kayaks sold this year. When you count the
wow,
$200 from Walmart and your, you know, academies and the bigger box places, because if it has fishing rod holders on it, it's considered a fishing kayak. And then of course you got all your mom and pop shops as well, independently owned places. So that number is pretty astronomical when you think about how far this can go and grow our sport. When you compare it to 9,000 bass boats, brand new bass. And it's not a competition between bass boats because, like I said, this is a great way to introduce people to bass fishing, and they may move their way up and feel like a bass boat side of things is where they want to be eventually. But until they have the money for that, it's a great way to get them started in our sport. And 9,000 compared to, and obviously that's just fiberglass bass boats. There's a lot more John boats and aluminum. And, you got to add all that up. And the used market is unreal for boats. But regardless, the number is staggering, and it keeps just happening every year because it's economy proof. If the economy drops, kayak sales, boom, people sell, maybe they sell their boats, so they sell some possessions they want to still get on the water. It grows. If the economy is booming, then they say, well, I have enough money for a bass boat, and why would I not have some kayaks too? Then they still buy kayaks. So it's really a cool thing for our sport. And I'm excited to be a part of it, and we'll see where it goes.
We know one of the best anglers that I know. I always try to look at who's not on the Elite Series and who should be or will be skill wise. And Nolan Miner, one of our good friends from the college series, fished for West Virginia.
Right.
He almost qualified for the Elite Series last year, top 15 in the Northern Opens. And he had enough funding out of college for 1 year of the Opens and didn't qualify, but has now transitioned into fishing kayak events this season. And he said he's 4 for 4 on cutting checks. And obviously those checks are a little bit maybe lower than a $10,000 Elite Series check, but the cost of entry is much lower as well. So it's all scale, but it's a way for him to compete, to get money, to buy him some time and still be competitive.
Exactly.
If he wants to go do that, or hey, maybe he wants to be the next Drew Gregory and just own the kayak series. There's options for him there.
That's right. And I know Nolan well, been on podcasts with him and met him at events. Great guy. Him and his brother both are real sticks.
Yeah.
And you know what's cool, Ronnie? You'll appreciate this. So there was no fantasy game for kayak fishing, and I got so fed up with it. I went to a website where you can build your own fantasy game. I created it, and I passed it over to one of the media organizations in kayak fishing called Paddle and Fin. They do podcasts and whatnot. And I said, you guys, take this over. I ran it for a couple of years, and we use the money the anglers earn whenever they cash a check. That's the exact same number of fantasy points you get for your 6 anglers you get to pick. And I've got Nolan on my team. I knew he was coming from the Opens. I picked him on my team. And guess what else? I picked Bailey Eichbrett. Also
yeah, 10 grand.
And he won this past, so both those guys cut checks at this tournament this past weekend. So I was kind of jealous not to be there, but I had a lot going on and got the young ones at home. So I had to get back as well. But hey, you're right about that, man. And I figured you would appreciate that coming from, the fantasy side of things.
Kyle, the king of fantasy, which is, I've been labeled as on Bassmaster Live. And to be honest, Mark Zona during a commercial break said, you need to just dub yourself as the king of fantasy. Just do it. And you'll own it. And I've gotten so many texts. I beat the king of fantasy this week. And I was like, I'm not the king because of my placement. I'm just the king because no one else was the king. No one else said it. So it looks like, Kyle, maybe you'll be the king of kayak fantasy until I get the hang of it. So since you've got Bassmaster cover shots of kayak anglers as well.
As far as I know, maybe the only one to this point. So
yeah, exactly.
1 for 1 on kayak
right.
cover. Yeah. Hopefully I get the second one. If there is a second one, I'm sure there will be at some point.
Well, that's awesome. Great podcast. Drew, I thank you for joining us. Congratulations on your win. We've had all the winners from this season. We had a great conversation with Garrett Morgan, Justin Largen, Eric Siddiqi, and Drew Gregory for our kayak podcast. Look for them for the Old Town Bassmaster Angler of the Year race at the end of the season. I know they're going to all be duking it out once we end Pickwick in the fall. Drew, appreciate you joining us. Thank you for all that you've done for the kayak anglers over the years and growing that aspect of the sport. And thank you for teaching us, because I know that this won't be our last discussion, and we'll be able to learn a whole lot more as it changes.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome.
Thanks, Drew.
That was Drew Gregory. And Kyle, man, I mean, our guests of the podcast couldn't be any better than we had for the kayak series. All the winners, obviously, but well-respected anglers as well.
Absolutely. And that's something that you and I talked about before we even started the podcast, is every single one of these guys were a part of that group that, like we mentioned,
pioneers, yeah,
absolutely. Pioneers of the sport and are absolute sticks and just choose to fish from a kayak. And you can just tell, listening to all 4 of those anglers, that they have it going on, and they are super knowledgeable and just super good at bass fishing. And like Drew said, are just choosing to fish from a kayak for a variety of different reasons. So I think that's definitely eye-opening, and I hope that other people see that and understand what Drew's coming or where he's coming from there, because it's definitely true.
Well, I agree 100%. Been very clued in. Hey, I'm going to have Garrett Morgan come about 20 minutes over to Little Rock, and or maybe I'll meet him in Conway and we'll just go catch some big ones on Lake Conway, where basically, to be honest, I'm not taking my fiberglass boat on Lake Conway. Kayak is the way to go, because not only is there trees, there's rebar, it's shallow. And so that's a great proving ground for that.
Lake Conway so bad you could knock your lower unit out of your kayak on that.
Exactly. You got to slide the trolling motor head way up, but
no fun.
Kyle, what a great podcast. Appreciate you hopping in and taking a little bit of time. One of our longer, probably our longest podcast so far, but we had 4 guests, 4 pioneers in the sport and the aspect of kayak bass fishing, and our 4 champions so far for the 2022 Yamaha Rightwaters Bassmaster Kayak Series presented by TourneyX. And man, we mentioned it. I'm all about Angler of the Year races and the tight competitions. Who's going to catch them? Now that we have 2 events left, one of them will get culled off of there. It's going to come down to the last hour of fishing at Pickwick, no doubt, to determine Angler of the Year. So we'll keep an eye on the Old Town Bassmaster Angler of the Year race for sure. But thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast, and we will see you in the next one. Got still a little bit of a break before Lake Fork, but we will see you next week on another episode. See you, Kyle.